एक नया डायमेंशन दिया है।
Hello and welcome. I'm Sima Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Russian President Vladimir Putin says he is ready to host a summit with Ukraine in Russia, but rejects NATO membership and Western security guarantees, while Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni rules out sending troops. Meanwhile, Ukraine strikes Russian oil refineries as Moscow claims to destroy long-range drone bases. The Kremlin says it will not accept any foreign troops in Ukraine after French President Emmanuel Macron announces 26 allies have pledged forces by land, sea, or air once a ceasefire is reached. Macron says U.S. support will be finalized soon, with President Trump signaling possible air cover as Zelensky presses for sky protection. China says it strongly opposes any move to impose economic pressure after President Trump urges Europe to target Beijing over the war in Ukraine. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Go Jiakun warns against dragging China into the matter. The Israeli military says it now holds 40% of Gaza City and vows to intensify operations until Hamas is defeated, while slamming an EU commissioner for calling the war a genocide. At the same time, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio warns countries that recognizing a Palestinian state will only create more problems. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the United States will blow up foreign crime groups if necessary, as he announces Ecuador's Los Lobos and Los Coneros will be labeled terrorist organizations. His warning comes days after a U.S. strike kills 11 people on a Venezuelan vessel in the Caribbean, while 2 Venezuelan aircraft later fly close to a U.S. Navy ship. Thailand's parliament meets to choose a new prime minister after days of political turmoil, even as former leader Thaksin Shinawatra departs abroad. The polarizing billionaire flies to Dubai, leaving his Pheu Thai party in disarray during the crucial vote. Australia and Japan agreed to deepen security cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, including joint evacuation of citizens at risk overseas. Japan's Foreign Minister Takeshi Iwaya says both countries will strengthen deterrence and plan for regional contingencies. Portugal mourns after 16 people die in a Lisbon funicular clash, with victims from 6 countries and more than 20 others injured. Amid the wreckage, a 3-year-old German boy survives, as authorities launch an independent investigation into this tragedy. South Korea says it will join the United States and Japan in annual Freedom Edge defensive drills starting September 15 to counter North Korea's missile and nuclear threats. The exercises will upgrade aerial, naval, and cyber capabilities and are described as essential for regional stability. A magnitude 6.2 earthquake strikes southeastern Afghanistan, the third since Sunday, when more than 2,200 people were killed in one of the country's deadliest quakes in years. Officials say the epicenter is in remote Nangarhar province, near the Pakistan border, with reports of damage still coming in. Russian President Vladimir Putin has issued a firm stance on Ukraine's future ties with NATO and the European Union. He declared Ukraine's potential membership in NATO as completely unacceptable for Russia, while acknowledging Kyiv's legal right to seek EU membership. Putin has also expressed readiness to hold a peace summit in Moscow and invited Ukrainian leaders to come, promising full security guarantees. However, he stressed that any peace agreement, must address Russia's security concerns, emphasizing that one country's security should not come at the expense of another. While speaking on the topic, he also warned that any foreign military forces entering Ukraine during the conflict would be treated as legitimate targets. Let's have a look at what the Russian president has said.
Что касается возможных контингентов воинских на Украине, но это одна из первопричин втягивания Украины в НАТО. Поэтому, если там будут появляться какие-то войска, особенно сейчас, в ходе ведения боевых действий, исходим из того, что это будут законные цели для их поражения. А если будут достигнуты решения, которые приведут к миру, к долгосрочному миру, то тогда я просто не вижу никакого смысла в их нахождении на территории Украины. Вот и все.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has urged NATO and allies to accelerate security guarantees, signaling ongoing diplomatic efforts amid the conflict. This comes as Zelensky has stated he spoke to NATO Chief Mark Rutte on security guarantees. Now for this discussion, we are joined by Glenn Grant. He's an ex-advisor to Defense Minister of Ukraine, joins us live from Riga. Thank you very much, Glenn, for joining us today. Good to see you. Thank you. Glenn, do you think, what do you make of coming comments from Russian President Vladimir Putin?
Well, he is merely signaling again, as he's been doing week after week, that there is no intention of stopping this war. That he is after his maximalist results, and his words echo exactly the same as he's been saying, which highlights that there is no peace deal on the table, and there's not likely to be a peace deal on the table, because what Putin is after is complete capitulation by Ukraine. I mean, his comment that you just made about one country's security should not come at the expense of another. Well, you know, he's asking Ukraine to give up totally its security at the expense of Russia. So he's actually, in many ways, he's talking nonsense, and he shouldn't be believed, because all he's after is delay so that he can keep using all the tools he has to keep attacking Ukraine.
And do you think him inviting Zelensky and also the other Ukrainian leaders to Russia, is it trustable? Can they trust and go for negotiation? What do you make of this?
Well, of course they can't. It's not trustable, and of course they can't. I mean, look at what he's been doing for the last 15 years. Everything shows that he lies and that he is completely untrustworthy. I mean, he's like a wolf or a bear. I mean, he's like saying, "Dear chickens, please come and see me in my lair, and I promise not to eat you." I mean, it's just complete nonsense, and we need to get real about this man. He's Hitler in another form, and his aim is domination, and he's going to keep going until everybody realizes that this is the case. I hope they don't realize too late.
And should Ukraine's right to join NATO or this EU be influenced by Russia's security concerns, or his remarks, Vladimir Putin's remarks, or does this undermine Ukrainian sovereignty?
It doesn't undermine Ukrainian sovereignty. It undermines the sovereignty of every single country that's in NATO, and it undermines the sovereignty of every sovereign democratic country in the world. Because what he's saying is, we, Russia, demand the right to see what you'd want to do, and we're going to say no or yes as we want to, not as you want to as a democratic country. So this is really, really dangerous if people start following this line that Russia should have some say in this. No, Russia is a sovereign country. It should have no say in any other sovereign country's life, wishes, demands, or anything. So Ukraine wants to join NATO, good. Let Ukraine try to join NATO. It doesn't mean NATO will let them in, but at least Ukraine has the right to actually to ask and to work towards it.
Right. Thank you, Glenn, for sharing that. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now we move on. US President Donald Trump has urged Europe to stop buying Russian oil and increase economic pressure on China to help end the war in Ukraine. President Trump has emphasized the need for Europe and allies to take stronger action against Russia and China. In response, China has firmly rejected these calls. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Goh Jiakun has said Beijing strongly opposes efforts to drag China into this conflict and has condemned any attempts to impose economic pressure on the country. Now we go back to Glenn Grant. He's an ex-advisor to Defense Minister of Ukraine. Thank you, Glenn, for staying with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you think why is Trump dragging China, or it seems like as if he is pushing away the earlier call that he made that he will end the war, or to the responsibility to other countries, including China here. What do you think of this?
It's this is very complex. I mean, his comment to that Europe has got to stop buying Russian oil. Well, you know, that he knows that that's not going to happen in terms of Hungary and Slovakia. They will keep doing it because they are, at the moment, their leadership is pro-Russian. And probably other countries as well that we don't know about necessarily buying much. But his action about Europeans pushing towards China, it seems almost the reverse of what he's saying, which is, you know, reinforce the strength of China supporting Russia by the West going against China. In other words, it's like he's creating a stronger axis against the West by his words than the reverse. Because of course, I mean, the Chinese comment, which was truly wonderful, which was, you know, we don't want to be dragged into this war, when they are the country that is actually providing Russia with much of the technological expertise in terms of things like chips and spare parts that they need to make their drones. So I hardly think that China's got a leg to stand on in this case. But it is a very strange comment to make, unless you believe that what he's trying to do is strengthen the axis against the West.
And also, is it fair for U.S. now to pressure other countries, China also, but including European nations, to change their economic relationships in order to influence the outcome that Trump wants?
That is a wonderful question. Thank you very much for it, because it opens up a whole bag of economic questions. I mean, do we think it's fair? Well, come on. Trump has been throwing tariffs around all over the place against China, against everybody, and actually causing massive disruption across the global markets with what he's doing. So you could say it's not fair for him to do anything at the moment because he's in the wrong in the way that he's been acting economically with other countries. And you know, at what stage do we reach when people start saying go away because we're sick of what you're doing? I think we're getting close to that. You know, the president of Portugal actually making a point that Trump was working for Russia. I wonder how many other countries are going to start making the same points and actually start ignoring America in what they're doing. Dangerous times we're in.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Glenn, for always joining us and sharing your insight.
Not at all, thank you.
Thank you. Now we move on to Middle East. Palestinians in Gaza City inspect today that the aftermath of an overnight Israeli strike on a tent that killed and injured several people, according to medics. Israel now controls 40% of the city as its bombardment forces more families to flee while many residents refuse to leave the ruins. Troops push through the outer suburbs and close in just kilometers from the city center. The military says it targets tunnels and weapons to defeat Hamas, but the offensive launched August 10th draws international criticism and even stirs strategic tensions within Israel. Let's listen in to one of the displaced Palestinians whose son and grandchildren were killed in the Israeli strikes has said.
مستهدفين الخيمة خيمة نايمين فيها لا بالهم ولا نايمين والأطفال نايمين هم وأمهم وأبوهم لسه دوب خاشش عليهم هيك يستهدفوهم كل العيلة هيك تروح كل العيلة تروح ايش نقول لا اله الا الله احسن من كل حاجه. هم يقولوا منطقه امنه، هنا قاعدين في المنطقه الامنه، وين هذا الامان؟ وين الامان؟ احنا ملاقيين امان في اي منطقه؟ وين ما نروح فيها خبط؟ وين ما نروح فيها هذا؟ وين نروح؟
Now for this discussion, we're joined by Yossi Cooper-Wasser. He's an Israeli intelligence and security expert, joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you, Yossi, for always joining us. How does this Israeli public perceive the balance between military objectives and the humanitarian consequences of operations in Gaza, including the loss of IDF soldiers?
Well, we are in a war. You know, it's a long war, and we have to win this war. And winning this war means that we have to remove Hamas from power in Gaza, and for doing that, we need to take over the Gaza City area because that's where Hamas is left. We've taken over most of the rest of the Gaza Strip, and what's left is Gaza City and some small towns in the center part of Gaza. That's what we need to do, and we are putting pressure, and we are asking the population to leave. And I heard this lady speaking about where she would go to. We have prepared safer places for the population of Gaza City to move to, south of the city, and that's where she has to go to. And we asked them very politely to move, and we are preparing everything for them to be provided by everything they need. But they have to decide to move. Hamas is trying to prevent them from moving south and evacuating the city. And this ends up with suffering for the population, unfortunately. But we have to win this war and release the hostages that are still in the hands of Hamas. They are now releasing a video clip indicating that they have 8 living hostages still in Gaza City itself. And we have to make them realize that they have to release the hostages and disarm themselves so that the people of Gaza, the civilians, will be able to have a better life. That has to happen, and the sooner the better.
Should play in addressing the immediate security threats and the long-term humanitarian impact on the civilians in Gaza?
Yeah, of course, it's not easy to live in an area where war is being waged. And that's why we are asking the civilians to evacuate the areas where the battle itself is taking place. We are now preparing the battlefield for the taking over of Gaza City. We mobilized a lot of reservists, and we are training and practicing before we move into the city itself. We've already taken some 40% of the city, of the outskirts of the city, and now we're closing on the rest of it. And we hope that Hamas will decide to give up and disarm themselves and release those just without us entering into battle inside Gaza City. That's what we hope to see happening. But Hamas instead has put up a position that says that they are not going to consider any concession and any release of hostages unless Israel is succumbing to all their demands. And that's where we stand. That's, I mean, all of that could have been solved in 1 minute if Hamas would have realized that there's no other way but to disarm. But they insist on fighting, and that's why we have to fight. It should be clear that we cannot stop this war before it's clear to everybody in the Palestinian constituency that 7th of October, the massacre of 7th of October was a mistake of Hamas, and that Hamas has paid dearly for that terror attack. And that would be clear to everybody once Hamas is disarmed and relinquishes power in Gaza and removed it and moved, and the power moves to the moderate Palestinians. That's what we are trying to accomplish.
Thank you very much, Yossi, for joining us and sharing that your insight from Israel. Now we move on. Australia and Japan have said that they will deepen cooperation to tackle growing security challenges in the Indo-Pacific, including helping each other to evacuate citizens at risk. Japan's Foreign Minister Takeshi Iwaya has said that they agreed to strengthen collective deterrence and discuss potential security contingencies affecting both countries and the region. His comments come after a two-on-two meet in Tokyo, where Japan's Foreign and Defense Minister Iwaya and Gen Nakatani meet their Australian counterparts Penny Wong and Richard Marles. Both countries' close U.S. allies have forged closer ties as China's regional influence expands, including joint military training and a reciprocal access agreement signed in 2023, allowing forces to operate on each other's territory. Last month, Japan clinches an Australian $10 billion deal to build warships for Australia, its biggest defense sale since ending a military export ban in 2014. Mars has said that there is no country with greater strategic trust than Japan. Let's listen in to what both the countries' defense ministers have said.
We have discussed today in an increasingly complex and difficult world, it is also deeply reassuring and gratifying that at this moment in our relationship, there is no country in the world with whom we have greater strategic trust. Of course, in choosing this capability, in choosing this platform on the basis of capability, we're also really excited about what it means in terms of deepening our bilateral relationship and deepening the cooperation between our two defence industrial bases, and that formed part of the conversation that we had today and forms part of the outcome of this meeting.
力による一方的な現状変更を抑止をするため、協力して行動することの重要性を再度確認をいたしまして、情報共有、そして FDO といった抑止活動に関する議論の深化を通じた協力を強化をするということでも一致をいたしました。日豪に加えまして、日米豪の協力の進展についても議論を行いました。F35 の共同訓練について、本年は日本で、来年はオーストラリアで実施することを歓迎をし、さらなる連携強化に向けて取り組んでいくことを確認をいたしました。
Now for this discussion, we are joined by Dr. Asta Chada. She's a professor at Ritsumeikan University, joins us live from Kyoto. Thank you, Professor, for joining us. Welcome to NewsX World. How might this deeper security cooperation between Australia and Japan, including joint military training and evacuation planning, impact this balance of power in the Indo-Pacific region?
Thank you for having me here. Well, this meeting between Australia and Japan comes at a very critical moment. They both have a common, let's say, threat in the region, which is from their overdependence, traditional overdependence on China. So this meeting is supposed to overcome not just that overdependence that has been very traditional, very historic, but also to overcome this new sort of uncertainty that is being fostered in the Indo-Pacific as a result of US policies. So this bilateral, let's say, meeting, which is a 2+2 meeting, this format, this was their 15th such meeting, and they've tried to use this platform, as you previously played videos of the representatives from both sides, clearly mentioning they have decided to elevate their partnership, which now includes defense cooperation, which is more critical for Japan because traditionally Japan has not been actively exporting its defense equipment. But ever since that ban has been lifted, Japan is now going to be the choice for Australia for the Mogami class frigates. That's very important because now Japan will also be able to supply these as a most, or let's say as a very, very trusted partner of Australia. Besides that, they're going to increase interoperability between Australian Defence Forces and Japanese self-defense forces. And let's not forget, this cooperation will also extend to non-traditional security issues such as economic security, building supply chain resilience, focusing on more collaborative efforts towards critical minerals, and let's not forget the semiconductors. So I look at this meeting coming at a very opportune moment. At the same time, this meeting seems to have been very well calculated because they have come out with concrete measures as to on what they want to cooperate with each other.
Thank you very much for joining us and sharing that insight, Professor. Now we have a breaking news. Thailand has a new Prime Minister, Anutin Charnvirakul, has secured enough votes in Parliament to take the top job. The move follows the Constitutional Court's dismissal of former Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra on August 30th over an ethics violation. She becomes the sixth Shinawatra-backed leader removed from office in 2 decades of political power struggles. Anutin previously served as a Deputy Prime Minister and Interior Minister before resigning in June. Now we move on. Thailand has a new Prime Minister, Anutin Charnvirakul, has secured enough votes in Parliament to take the top job. The move follows the Constitutional Court's dismissal of former Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra on August 30th over an ethics violation. She becomes the sixth Shinawatra-backed leader who was removed from office in over 2 decades of political power struggles. Anutin, who was previously served as Deputy Prime Minister and Interior Minister before resigning in June. Now we move on. Donald Trump has hosted leaders from the biggest U.S. tech companies at a lavish White House state dining room dinner. The dinner included Meta's Mark Zuckerberg, Microsoft's Bill Gates, Apple's Tim Cook, OpenAI's Sam Altman, Google CEO Sundar Pichai, and Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella, among others. He has invited many of them to speak, and Zuckerberg has told President Trump the companies were investing heavily in U.S. infrastructure, estimating Meta and its peers would pour in billions of dollars in the next few years. Let's listen in.
Well, thanks for hosting us. I mean, this is quite a group to get together, and I think all of the companies here are making huge investments in the country in order to build out data centers and infrastructure to power the next wave of innovation. So it's we don't often get together as the CEOs of the different companies, but it's good to see everyone.
How much are you spending, would you say, over the next few years?
Oh gosh, I think it's probably going to be something like, at least $600 billion through 28 in the U.S.
Tech giants have appreciated President Trump's leadership and gave their inputs about the future of tech and innovation in America. Bill Gates have spoken about innovation in vaccines as well as gene editing. Let's listen in.
And my second career is innovation, innovating in health in areas like vaccines or gene editing. And the President and I are talking about taking American innovation to the next level to cure and even eradicate some of these diseases. He mentioned polio, which is one that we're close. We don't need new science on that one. For some like HIV and sickle cell, we do need new science, but the U.S. Has the seeds that in the same way that Warp Speed took those seeds and put them together, I think something fantastic can be done.
Apple's Cook has said that Apple was making major U.S. manufacturing investments thanks to the administration's policies, while OpenAI's Altman has called President Trump a pro-business, pro-innovation president, whose approach was helping American companies lead in artificial intelligence. Meanwhile, President Trump has thanked the tech giants present at the table and spoke about imposing tariffs on companies that did not plan to come into the USA. Let's listen in.
Yeah, I have. I've discussed it with the people here, chips and semiconductors, and we'll be putting tariffs on companies that aren't coming in. We'll be putting a tariff very shortly. You probably are hearing we'll be putting a fairly substantial tariff on, not that high, but fairly substantial tariff, with the understanding that if they come into the country, if they're coming in, building, planning to come in, there will not be a tariff.
Now for this discussion, we're joined by Major General Gigi Dwivedi. He's a global strategic defense expert, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you, Major General, for joining us as always. Great to see you here. Now, looking at this, does this close relationship between major CEOs and political leaders raise concerns about corporate influence over public policy and its regulation?
Well, President Trump, he has driven the geopolitics through geoeconomics, and that's exactly the way he is going about. And his major concern is that high-tech manufacturing must return to America so that it creates jobs for America, and also the wealth is created within the country. So that has been his stand, and therefore he has come out very categorically that all the big companies, they must now reverse back and come to the American mainland to do the manufacturing rather than outsourcing to other countries. And this is why this meeting has been held, because Trump wants to have a direct communication with the big tech giants and everyone who in the technical industry was at the dinner. So point is that this is the trend, and as you can make out from the speeches of Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates or Tim Cook, they all are on the same page, and they have appreciated President Trump for being a pro-business president, and also pro high technology manufacturing within the country. So this is definitely going to impact, because in the countries, even like he is going to even put tariffs on the semiconductor chips, and to that extent, I think even India will be affected, because a major manufacturing of iPhones is taking place in India, and I think it is a cause of concern, because if most of the industry gravitated back to the American mainland, then it is going to impact the current supply chains which are going to divert, and I'm sure this has to be considered, this has to be taken into consideration. But then at the end of the day, the president is quite categorical and vocal that he wants to bring high-tech manufacturing back into India for the larger economic interest. Suma.
And Major General, should government incentives and tariffs be used to pressure tech companies into investing domestically?
Well, that's the weapon or tool which President Trump is using, and he had been a very pro-tariff president, and we had known it earlier too in his first term that he had shown his hand, but now he is going hammer and tong as far as tariffs are concerned. But then each president or each country decides its own policies. Well, it's not being fair, because especially when you talked about India, that singling out countries and differentiating them, well, it doesn't go well. But then I think at the end of the day, you have to deal with it. If you can't convince Trump, then you have to do certain amount of mid-course correction. But at the end, I think what President Trump, his tariff policy, I don't think is going to change. It is the others who need to actually walk the talk and ensure that the damage is minimal and some negotiations are done, so that at the end of it, the home impact is neutralized or at least minimized. Asuma.
Right. Thank you very much, Major General Dr. Gigi Dwivedi, for joining us and sharing that insight. Now we move on to Giorgio Armani, the famed Italian fashion designer who has died at the age of 91. While announcing the news of his demise, the company wrote the designer's independence of thought and action was his hallmark. A funeral chamber will be open to the public between September 6th to September 7th at Milan's Armani Teatro. Following this, a private funeral will then be held for the friends and family. Although the company did not provide further details on Armani's death, the designer was absent from 3 Armani fashion shows over the summer due to his illness. Several of Armani's celebrity friends and contemporary fashion designers have poured praises and offered obituaries on social media platforms. While the known fashion designer Donatella Versace have written, Armani made history and will be remembered forever. Actor Julia Roberts called Armani a true friend and a legend. Armani founded the luxury fashion house that bore his name in 1975 in Milan, Italy, with his partner Sergio Gagliotti. Later this month, 50th anniversary celebrations for his company are expected to take place during Fashion Week in Milan. In the following years, his designs not only graced runways, but also Hollywood celebrities who wore his clothes on red carpets and movies. Here's how Giorgio Armani is being remembered in the industry and people who admired his work.
I mean, what an incredible visionary and great artist, and his life work, it's what he built, this empire of fashion and clothing and home. Armani as the man was such a towering figure. He also was someone who family was very important to him, and friendships were very important to him, and he had a really funny sense of humor, and there is a gaping hole in the fashion industry today.
I just happened to pass his store, so definitely an icon in the fashion industry, and I also bought the makeup of Armani. Yeah, beautiful fashion and clothes, definitely a staple people look up to.
Timeless. Like it's just, I mean, what, 50 years? How many decades he's been doing it, and it's still very relevant. So I think it's something that in the next 50 years is still going to be relevant. That's the legacy that I think he's leaving behind. And I think even, different brands have different different levels. And I think the way he's been able to do it, he's the home stuff, the high level stuff, the mid-tier level stuff, everything kind of has his feel and his signature. So that I think is really special, and not a lot of people get to do that.
Obviously, it's one of the biggest fashion houses in the world that we've known for centuries, and it's obviously really, really sad to hear the passing of Giorgio Armani. Not only himself, but also sad to see that the fashion house will now have to be taken over by someone else. How will that impact the fashion house, which we've seen over years? Will the classic designs change? Will it change the outlook for the company? But obviously, really sad to hear the passing of him.
Well, this is all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world.